This is why you need to know about Syed Jamaluddin Afghani. He had big dreams, and he wanted to help people learn and grow. Syed Jamaluddin Afghani traveled to many countries. He talked to people about learning and working together. He believed everyone could make the world better. Isn't that awesome? I think we can be heroes too, just like him. Syed Jamaluddin Afghani, an architect of the modern Islamic intellectual revival and an anti-imperialist thinker. Who was Jamaluddin Afghani? His name was Jamaluddin, and his titles include the Sage of the East, the Revolutionary, and the Great Mujahid. He was a descendant of the famous Hadith scholar Syed Ali Tirmidhi, and further back of the Prophet's grandson Hussein, R.A. His ancestors had settled in the city of Asadabad in Afghanistan in 783 CE. His father, Syed Safdar, was a learned scholar, quite influential and well-known in his social circle. There are not much details about Jamaluddin's mother Sakina Begum, but she is said to be a religious lady also related to Imam Hussein, R.A. Birth Jamaluddin was born in the month of Shaban 1254 AH, 1839 CE, in the city of Asadabad in Afghanistan. There is controversy surrounding his origins, with some historians claiming that he was actually born in Iran and taken to Iraq during his childhood, but others believe that these claims lack authenticity. Childhood and early life. Jamaluddin was a young child when his father was summoned to Kabul by the Afghan government due to political reasons. Syed Safdar's influence in Asadabad was deemed dangerous by the government, and the summons was an attempt to keep him away from the area. At the age of 8, Jamaluddin's education began in Kabul. His father was his first teacher. Jamaluddin possessed extraordinary intelligence and progressed rapidly in his studies of history, religious law, logic, mathematics, medicine, languages, and natural sciences. The names of his teachers cannot be determined with any certainty. While a couple of names have been suggested, they lack authenticity. Overall, it seems that his excellent education was largely due to his personal interest in specific fields of study, and by the age of 18, he had progressed quite far in those fields. It was around this time that his father received permission to return to their city, and Jamaluddin returned with him. A year after their return, in 1856 CE, his father passed away. Stepping into the practical world. Following the death of his father, Jamaluddin set out to gain worldly experience by traveling to India. Here he studied modern mathematics, but a lot of time was spent gauging the political situation. The Mughal Empire was at the time breathing its last, and the East India Company had control over all of India. After India, Jamaluddin made his way to Makkah for Hajj. He spent a year in the region, observing the political, scholarly, and spiritual situation of its inhabitants. From here he traveled to Syria and Palestine, and then to Iraq and Iran. What were his activities during these travels? Details are not available, though researchers suggest that he was carefully observing and noting the political, religious, and social climate in different areas of the Islamic world, in order to better plan his future efforts. He had an extremely active and dynamic personality from the beginning, even as a child. A burning desire to correct the wrongs he saw in the Islamic world was ingrained into him. It seemed predestined that he would focus his efforts on reforming the state of the Muslim Ummah. Returning from his travels to Afghanistan, Jamaluddin began taking an active interest in politics. He became a counselor to the King Dost Muhammad Khan, who appreciated him enough to appoint him as a tutor to his son, Prince Muhammad Azam. After the death of Dost Muhammad Khan in 1863 CE, his third son, Sher Ali Khan, was made king according to his will. Sher Ali Khan's older brothers were unwilling to give up their perceived right to the throne, but Jamaluddin interceded and managed to avert a possible bloodbath. Sher Ali Khan appointed him as his advisor. In this role, Jamaluddin took many memorable steps during his reign. One such step was to publish a newspaper titled The Daytime Sun, Shams-ul-Nahar, to raise awareness of local and global political issues in Afghanistan. The newspaper was highly popular. The increased political awareness and rising trend of reading newspapers and magazines in the country was attributed largely to his efforts. Jamaluddin undertook many other initiatives, such as establishing schools based on modern principles, streamlining the postal system, suggesting improvements in the military, improving diplomatic relations with other countries, etc. His efforts were well on the way to turn Afghanistan into a prosperous, modern Islamic country when political conflict disrupted all his plans. Muhammad Rafiq, one of Sher Ali Khan's ministers, succeeded in his efforts to ignite the king's anger and suspicion against his brothers. Sher Ali Khan's fury could not bode well for his brothers, who left the area. So did Jamaluddin, who fled to India. Hot in pursuit, Sher Ali Khan caught up with his brothers, killing one and capturing another. His own son was killed in the conflict. Lost in grief, Sher Ali Khan was thus unable to prevent yet another brother, Muhammad Azam, who was Jamaluddin's disciple, from deposing him and taking over the country. Muhammad Azam Khan immediately appointed him as his advisor, but failed to heed his advice and was caught up in internal politics. Sher Ali Khan, with some help from the British, used this opportunity to take control of the country once again. Sick of these family battles, Jamaluddin left Afghanistan and traveled towards India. After the rebellion of 1857, the British had managed to take full control of the country. Jamaluddin found the climate uninviting and instead headed towards Egypt. Jamaluddin in Egypt, sowing the seeds of freedom. When Jamaluddin first arrived in Cairo, he intended to stay only for 40 days. Mostly to avoid idleness, he arranged to give Arabic grammar classes at the Al-Azhar University. Within a few days, his residence was crowded by university students who wanted to spend more time in his company. His lectures did not just discuss the Arabic language, he also spoke about politics, a subject he was an expert at. The call of Islamic freedom resonated deeply with the young Egyptian students. Egypt at the time had fallen victim to the greed of European colonialism like most Muslim countries. Egyptian politics was overshadowed by the influence of the British, who were a distinct target in Jamaluddin's speeches about the importance of freedom and the tricks and stratagems employed by Europeans to gradually enslave Egypt. These speeches reached the ears of British spies who were alarmed at Jamaluddin's popularity. There was a growing likelihood that the youth of Egypt would be influenced enough by Jamaluddin's sincerity, passion, and call for action that they would be mobilized to protect their freedom. Therefore, some agents of the British raised a storm of protest after a Christian man converted to Islam at the behest of Jamaluddin, and this protest was galvanized by liberal forces within the country. The ruler of Egypt, Khedive Ismail Pasha, used this opportunity as an excuse and ordered Jamaluddin to leave the country. Though Jamaluddin departed, he had sowed the seeds of freedom into a land fertile for a movement for liberty. Soon, Egypt was teeming with the call to independence. Stay in Turkey. After withdrawing from Egypt, Jamaluddin first intended to go for Hajj, but then changed his mind and decided instead to travel to Constantinople. His stay in Egypt had been his debut into the Islamic world as a scholar, as well as a political player. When he reached Turkey, the Prime Minister Ali Pasha got the news of his arrival, and he arranged a meeting out of curiosity. He was very much impressed by the passionate, sincere Jamaluddin dressed in flowing Afghan clothes, and appointed him to Majlis ul Ma'arif, a national council for promoting science and arts. He wanted Jamaluddin to introduce educational programs that would benefit Turkey. Jamaluddin put forward several suggestions, but they were rejected by the local scholars because they felt that their own personal interests were being threatened by this upstart scholar and his suggestions. The Sheikhul Islam, highest rank of an hierarchy of scholars used in the Ottoman Empire, of the time Hassan Effendi, felt particularly threatened by the growing popularity of Jamaluddin amongst the general population and amongst influential people in authority. Helpless to counter it, he and his supporters contented themselves for the time being with watching for an opportunity to discredit Jamaluddin in front of the general public and the government. Jamaluddin's popularity with the public, however, was rising rapidly. People flocked to him in thousands, listening to his speeches and lectures in Hagia Sophia and in Sultan Ahmed Mosque. His rhetoric had such logic and power that people named him the Enchanter of Hearts. In Ramadan 1287 AH, 1870 CE, the head of the Osmania University, Tahsin Effendi, invited Jamaluddin to give a lecture on the benefits of industry and commerce. Initially, he declined the invitation, citing his lack of fluency in Turkish. Upon further insistence, he prepared a long lecture which he also showed to the Minister of Education and various other government officials. Their approval was given, and Jamaluddin consented to speak at the event. On the day of the lecture, a vast number of people gathered to listen to him, including ministers, state officials, scholars, and journalists. The Sheikh-ul-Islam was also present, hoping to catch an opportunity to cast Jamaluddin in a bad light. The lecture was very well expressed and eloquent. Jamaluddin compared the economy of a country to a human body, with each industry comparable to a particular body part, performing a unique and essential function to keep the body alive and well. After describing the analogy in detail, he stated that the body needs a soul, and the soul could either be prophethood, revelation, or it could be human wisdom. Prophethood comes from God, and therefore what it tells us is free from error, while wisdom comes from humans and is therefore prone to errors and biases. These ideas were neither new nor radical, nor did they oppose traditional scholarly views. But the Sheikh-ul-Islam added in lies and exaggeration, proclaiming that he had heard Jamaluddin claim that prophethood is a profession like any other. He encouraged his contemporaries and preachers to publicize this so-called blasphemy during their sermons and raise awareness among the public. As the campaign against Jamaluddin took off, he deduced immediately that hatred and jealousy had sparked this conspiracy by the Sheikh-ul-Islam. He went on the defensive, sparking a debate between the two. Newspapers and magazines published articles from both sides discussing various controversial issues. Some friends of Jamaluddin advised him not to prolong the debate and to choose silence, allowing the whole matter to cool down. Jamaluddin refused to give in, however, and the situation continued to escalate until those in authority decided that it would be best for Jamaluddin to leave Turkey for a few months and perhaps return once the affair was settled. Once again, Jamaluddin was forced to leave the country, and he headed towards Egypt with some of his companions. In his book, Jamaluddin Afghani, The Herald of Unity in the Islamic World, Qazi Abdul Ghaffar discusses the events that took place in Constantinople during Jamaluddin's stay. He writes, "The fact of the matter is that Syed Jamaluddin's personality attributes became crystal clear during his stay in Constantinople. His courage and fearlessness, his competence and faith, and his strong feelings against the ultra-conservatives, all these were highlighted as vital elements of his personality. His friends and well-wishers realized that worldly powers would not daunt the Syed. He also realized for the first time the extent of influence wielded by the conservative faction, and this first encounter with close-minded scholars was a milestone in his life." Further, he writes that the Syed had become aware that the improvement of the religious situation in the Islamic world was impossible without working on the conservative faction of scholars, and the improvement of the political situation was impossible without resolving the despotism often prevalent in Muslim countries. This awareness and experience helped him greatly later on in life. Back in Egypt, on the 22nd of March 1871 CE, Jamaluddin arrived in Egypt once more with the intention of a short stay. As the news reached the Egyptian public, they flocked to him in droves, hoping to meet him. Students too pursued a meeting with him. They had not forgotten his last stay, and they wanted to gain as much knowledge and wisdom from him as they could. Jamaluddin also encountered the Prime Minister of Egypt, Riyad Pasha, who was so impressed that he invited him to stay in Egypt and awarded him an unconditional monthly allowance of 1,000 kirsch. The students of Al-Azhar University began to learn religious sciences, astronomy, Sufism, and jurisprudence from Jamaluddin. Students from all over Egypt visited his house hoping to benefit from his knowledge and wisdom. What appealed to them very much was his progressive way of thinking. Unlike the ultra-conservative scholars, Jamaluddin did not believe that it was wrong to seek modern knowledge that did not conflict with Islamic principles. This opinion was condemned by the conservatives and considered an innovation in religion, but Jamaluddin did not allow them to hinder him. The new generation agreed with his way of thinking and was convinced by his arguments. On one occasion he said, "What is astonishing and tragic is that our religious leaders have divided knowledge into two. One part they call Islamic knowledge, and the other they declare Western. As a result, they stop people from making use of beneficial knowledge. They do not understand that knowledge is something pure and noble, and it cannot be confined to one group of people. How strange it is that Muslims do not mind reading the works of Aristotle or Plato, but declare it impermissible to read Galileo or Kepler. They believe that their actions serve Islam, but they are in reality opposing it. Truth is that which can be supported by reason or evidence. In short, Muslims cannot progress or prosper until our leaders and scholars reform themselves. Reflection on this matter has always shown that when our nations decline, the signs manifest in our scholars first, and then reach the rest of the people. Syed Jamaluddin Afghani attempted several times to explain that reflecting on scientific facts and using new discoveries and innovations in no way opposes the Quran. Indeed, it is in agreement with it. The Quran does not explicitly tell us if the earth is a round, moving object or if it is frozen in place, but it does command us to reflect on the creation of the heavens and the earth. He did not like the approach of the traditional scholars that with each new scientific discovery, they start interpreting the Quran to adjust to the newfound knowledge. He believed that the explicit text of the Quran, Nus, is so clear-cut that it did not need any interpretation or adjustment. Principles of composition, trend of journalism, and setting up of welfare organizations. Apart from encouraging his students to study sciences, Jamaluddin also took on the responsibility to teach them the principles of modern composition. Before his arrival in Egypt, writings often had unnecessarily long and flowery introductions, complex phrases, and poetic wordings. Old styles of writing were popular and considered to be a reflection of accomplishment. Jamaluddin taught his students how to express their opinions and compose their essays and dissertations, and introduced them to a more natural and direct way of writing. The modern principles of composition that he taught them resulted in dozens of authors emerging later on who had formerly been his students or had learned from his students. He taught his pupils the importance of focused writing geared towards a specific purpose while remaining eloquent and articulate. This new style of writing resulted in a reformation in the academic and literary circles of Egypt. His students encompass big names in the area of literature, including but not limited to Sheikh Muhammad Abdu, Muhammad Bik Molchi, Ibrahim Bik Molchi, Abdul Karim Salman, Sad Zaghloul Pasha, and Ibrahim Effendi. Students from other countries who also benefited from his teachings include Allama Adib Ishaq Shami, Allama Salim Naqash Shami, Allama Saad Bistani, and more. These students played an important role in promoting Jamaluddin's beliefs and opinions to a wider audience. Jamaluddin also promoted journalism among his students. Reading the newspaper was not a common habit in Egypt, and the state of the journalism industry was such that the city of Alexandria published only 2 newspapers. These were in limited quantity and were mainly meant for the resident European population who wanted to keep abreast of global developments and were not much interested in local Egyptian politics. Jamaluddin believed that newspapers were very much necessary to raise political awareness among the Egyptian population. Therefore, he started a newspaper himself, along with his companions, titled Egypt. He later issued 2 more publications called The Mirror of the East and Guardian. These publications ran a daring commentary on the political situation in Egypt, with even the ruler and state officials not safe from its jibes. Occasionally, satire would be used to highlight and mock the incompetence of state officials. His accomplishments during his stay in Egypt were not limited to academia, literature, and politics. He believed it equally necessary to effect a change of mind and heart. In short, to bring about a revolution. He began to form various types of organizations across the country. Most of them were welfare organizations that integrated the propagation of Islamic values with charity work. Of these, Anjuman Hayat ul Watani, the Life of the Homeland organization, was particularly popular. Jamaluddin's close companion Muhammad Mahalati describes the functions of the organization in one of his writings. He states that amongst the organization's goals was to facilitate an environment of praying, both compulsory and voluntary prayers, to encourage people to enjoin what is good and forbid what is not, to call people towards Islam, to debate with the followers of other religions, especially Christianity, using reason and logic, and to help the poor and needy. The members of the organization were obligated to fill in a daily self-assessment form and evaluate themselves on how many good or bad deeds they had committed that day. In one particular month, the organization raised 10,000 tomans, and their monthly performance appeared as follows. 1,500 sick patients were looked after. 500 needy people had their needs taken care of. 2,500 drunkards and promiscuous individuals repented. 80 people working in British offices agreed to leave their jobs. 500 rich people agreed to sell some luxury items and give the money to charity. 75 poor people were given capital to start a business. 206 poor people were given financial assistance. 120 Christians accepted Islam. 24 conventions of debate with Christians were organized. These details have been set out here to demonstrate the broadness of Jamaluddin's scope and goals for the Islamic world. He wanted to see Muslims succeed in all aspects of life, be it morals, knowledge, material well-being, or spiritual connection. The renaissance of Islam and its domination in the world was his dream. On the political horizon, religious awakening, public welfare, and reform attempts in a society can only go this far when the government of the country is in the opposition instead of championing the cause. Such was the case in Egypt, where the political climate was quite similar to other Muslim countries around the world. Qazi Abdul Ghaffar describes the situation in these words. When the Sheikh, that is Syed Jamaluddin Afghani, entered Egypt for the second time, Khedive Ismail was ruling the country. The Sultan of the Ottoman Empire was the leader in name only. The English and the French were advancing rapidly. The Suez Canal had been inaugurated and acted as a heavy chain of European politics around the neck of the Egyptians. The incompetence and spendthriftness of Khedive Ismail had taken a heavy toll on the economy and the general public. Egypt was under a public debt of around £95 million, and Khedive's spending was increasing this loan annually by an average of £700,000. Farmers were suffering from the impact of drought. The capitalists and financiers of Europe were focused on receiving their loans and investment with interest, and despite their harsh demands of repayments, Khedive would not be bothered to reduce his spending. The last 8 years of this destructive period were witnessed personally by Syed Jamaluddin. Around this time, Europe formed a commission to enable European creditors to receive back the loans they had extended, and Britain and France took charge of Egypt's financial matters. The real reason behind this commission, of course, was to seize control of Egypt's revenues. Khedive Ismail sold shares of the Suez Canal to fund his spending. His only goal was to ensure that he has enough money for himself. This led to almost a complete cessation of its control to European powers. The iron chain with which Europe wanted to enslave not just Egypt, but the entire East Asia, was thus solidified further. Undoubtedly, it can be said that Khedive Ismail's life proved to be a curse for himself and others, and for his country and other countries. The years between 1857 and 1880 were some of the worst in Egyptian history, and they coincided with Syed Jamaluddin's efforts in the country. In this era of tribulations, he taught the oppressed people of Egypt a lesson in dignity and fighting for their rights. The darkness shadowing the Islamic world became to Syed Jamaluddin a call for action. Syed Jamaluddin incited the Egyptian people against Khedive Ismail's incompetence and corruption through his speeches and writings. Soon discontent and anger swept the nation. European powers, sensing his unpopularity, convinced the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire to dismiss him, and Tawfiq Pasha was appointed instead. Jamaluddin hoped that this change would be for the better, since Tawfiq Pasha had once been a student of his. But Pasha had changed since then. Sharif Pasha, who belonged to Jamaluddin's party and had been appointed as Prime Minister of Egypt, was deposed within a month. Tawfiq Pasha was convinced by his advisors that Jamaluddin would continue to pose a threat to him by demanding democratic reforms as long as he remained in Egypt. He was therefore ordered to leave the country. At 2 a.m. in the morning, soldiers knocked at Jamaluddin's door and surrounded him as soon as he came out. He was taken to the Suez under strict observation, with nothing but the clothes he was wearing. Here, the Iranian ambassador managed to arrange a visit with him. He offered Jamaluddin £3,000, saying that these might help him if he needed to purchase any essentials. Jamaluddin regarded the money with contempt and commented, "Keep the money, you need it more than I do. The lion creates sustenance for himself wherever he goes." Jamaluddin said farewell to Egypt for the last time, but he had lit the fire of freedom within the general public. Qazi Abdul Ghaffar pays tribute to him in these words. The first leader of Egyptian nationalists was not Egyptian. He was not born in Egypt, nor did he grow up there, and nor was he familiar with the ancient customs and traditions of Egypt. He belonged to the Afghan nation, a militant, almost savage people. But he traveled far and raised the banner of Islamic freedom and democracy high, until he gained so much influence in the lives of the common Egyptians that he became the greatest leader of the nation. In reality, the basis of Syed Jamaluddin's struggle was a principle superior to race or nation. He believed that the success and prosperity of any Islamic country was the success of Islam as a whole. He pictured the Islamic world as a body, and each country as a principal organ. Any organ that gains in strength is the cause of increased strength of the whole body. In India, at the close of the year 1879 CE, Jamaluddin Afghani left the Suez to go to Mumbai, where he stayed for a few days before proceeding to Hyderabad. Here he stayed with a liberal-minded, influential person, Rasul Yarjung. The climate in Hyderabad was not receptive to Jamaluddin's political ambitions. The failed War of Independence in 1857 CE had induced an overpowering sense of despair and loss within the Muslims. Even the religious leaders were in a state of passive hopelessness, and Jamaluddin himself was under strict monitoring by the British regime. Undaunted, Jamaluddin expressed an interest in the academic, cultural, and intellectual activities of Hyderabad. Soon he had become renowned amongst the scholars, and intellectual discussions and debates began to take place at his place of residence. During this period, Jamaluddin also discovered Sir Syed Ahmed Khan's naturalist school of thought. On the insistence of his friends, he wrote a paper on this, in which he explained that in every period of history, materialism tries to achieve its ambitions through misguiding beliefs. Those propagating such beliefs proclaim themselves to be sincere reformers and leaders of the people. However, nations that fall prey to such beliefs are inevitably carried towards decline and destruction. He further expanded upon the importance of remaining firm on the fundamental principles of religion, since that is vital for achieving success in this world and the hereafter. This article was published in the magazine Mu'alim, Teacher, owned by Maulvi Muhib Hussain. The same magazine printed 6 other articles by Jamaluddin, which are preserved as part of his legacy. Like everywhere he went, the students of Hyderabad took special note of his presence. He was surrounded by a crowd of students almost all the time who wished to learn from him whatever he would agree to teach. This popularity and influence once again posed a problem for higher powers. Jamaluddin's friend Blunt, who reached India after Jamaluddin, writes about his presence in Hyderabad. The students here greatly revere Jamaluddin. They are young and deeply passionate. They all hate Britain, and they are broad-minded about religion. They share Jamaluddin's opinions and admire him almost to the point of idealization. Hatred of the British establishment, along with such an influence amongst the youth, was a recipe for trouble, so the Prime Minister of Hyderabad, Salar Jung, decided to meet with Jamaluddin. Though very much impressed with the scope and depth of his knowledge, Salar Jung was still conscious of the potential threat Jamaluddin posed to the British regime. He offered to employ him in an official capacity to neutralize this risk, but Jamaluddin declined, saying that he was too hot-headed to be of much use in the position of a state employee. Later, however, he revealed that the main reason for declining the offer was that jealousy was rampant in Hyderabad, and he knew it would make him enemies who would incite the British authorities against him, which could lead to another exile. During his stay, Jamaluddin observed that most Indian Muslims either refused to learn modern sciences due to their disapproval of all things Western, or they learnt English and became disconnected from their roots and conformed to Western norms and traditions. He proposed the solution to this problem in an article where he discussed the importance of a national language for the success of a nation. He expressed surprise that the leaders in India did not appear to grasp the necessity of the national language being the medium for education. He wrote, Is it not strange that modern sciences and art now dominate the world, but not one of these excellent materials has been translated into the language of India? Have the people of India become blind to the fact that if beneficial knowledge does not become part of their collective national life in their own national language, then their nationhood will not achieve sustainability? Further in this article, he asks the intellectuals of India that since the British, who are highly advanced in modern sciences, have been reigning for so long, why has the opportunity not been availed to learn from them? What could be the reason for not translating the modern sciences into Urdu and other local languages in order to benefit the nation? He wrote, "How is it possible for the nation to benefit from these sciences if they are not first translated into the national language? How is it possible for these sciences to become widespread and long-lasting when they exist only in foreign languages? Why should one be proud of the fact that their library contains thousands of books in a foreign language, but none that could benefit their country written in a local language? How can a wise person consider another nation's pride as his own? And how can he take pride in the accomplishments of other nations instead of his own?" Jamaluddin advised the Prime Minister Salar Jung to translate books written in English into Urdu. Starting from primary school and making the way up to the higher classes, the whole system should undergo a gradual change in the medium of education. For this purpose, he encouraged his friends in literary circles to establish academies with the goal of translating English books. He personally supervised some translations. He also proposed that an Urdu university should be established and wrote articles in favor of this idea. While it was not implemented immediately, both Nawab Salar Jung and Nizam Hyderabad praised it very much. Jamaluddin continued to pursue this even after leaving India. Though his hopes did not come to fruition at the time, the dream came true 40 years later when Usmania University was established in Hyderabad. It was the first university in the world which taught all the faculties in Urdu language. On the Egyptian front, Irabi Pasha, who was leading the freedom movement, claimed during a protest, "I could have India rebel against the British." This challenge alarmed the British, who were already feeling that matters were spinning out of their control in Egypt. Although Jamaluddin was not linked directly to the movement of Irabi Pasha, he was deemed a potential threat and was thus put on house arrest in Calcutta. After the furore in Egypt died down, he was allowed once more to leave Calcutta. Jamaluddin in the Western world, Jamaluddin Afghani belonged to a nation that no superpower in the world has been able to enslave. This freedom did mean, however, that the Afghans consistently engaged in infighting and civil wars, while the rest of the Islamic world was almost completely subjugated by colonial powers. In spring 1883 CE, Jamaluddin traveled to America from Calcutta. After a short stay, he proceeded to London and then to Paris. Paris, at the time, was a hub for refugees from the East. From here, Jamaluddin wanted to conduct a dialogue with both the Eastern and the Western worlds. He wanted access to the Western public and to fair-minded authority figures to inform them of the perspective of the Islamic world on contemporary politics. He also wanted to give useful advice to the various Muslim leaders from all over the world who had been forced to leave their countries due to increasing dangers. For this purpose, he turned once more to journalism. His famous student Sheikh Mohammed Abdu from Egypt as well as Mirza Bakar Irani reached Paris in order to help him with his ambitions. In March 1884 CE, the first issue of the Arabic newspaper, The Indissoluble Link, Al-Urwat ul-Wuthqa, was published. The aim of this newspaper to raise awareness among the Eastern nations, especially Muslims, about the dangerous aspirations of the West. The tone of the newspaper was so harsh and unyielding that it alerted the Western powers at once. For example, in the very first issue it mentioned, "These nations built on greed and capitalism present themselves as friends wherever they go. They speak in soft, caring tones. Authoritative inflections appear gradually. In the beginning, they are there ostensibly to protect the throne in some countries, to prevent foreign powers from taking over, to strengthen the country, to suppress rebellions, etc. Such excuses allow them to infiltrate the power structure, and then they gain complete control." The first few issues of The Indissoluble Link sparked much restlessness in the West. The articles were translated into several languages. Extracts were quoted in Western newspapers. They also inspired a passionate response in the emotions of Muslims living in India, in Egypt, and even in France. Within a few months of its publication, various regimes began imposing restrictions on the newspaper. Its production and import was first banned in Egypt, then it was restricted from import in India. The British Empire forbade the newspaper everywhere within its boundaries. Jamaluddin and his student Sheikh Muhammad Abdu were busy trying to continue the publication in the small room where they were staying. After the restrictions had been imposed, the newspaper was sealed into envelopes before distribution to avoid detection from authorities. After the 18th issue was released, publication had to be stopped due to financial difficulties and extensive restrictions. Within a mere 6 months, the newspaper had caused an earthquake in Western corridors of power. The accomplishment of the newspaper was that it had shown the West its real face, while it also detailed out for the Muslims the real reasons for their decline without mincing the words. As a highly talented man, Jamaluddin often learnt the language of whichever country he was staying in, usually within a few weeks. During his stay in France, he learned French and quickly became familiar with the French newspapers and the type of articles that were published in them. His popularity and fame meant that his name was not unknown even in the West. His articles soon started appearing in Western newspapers. Around that time, in March 1883 CE, the famous philosopher Ernest Renan gave a lecture in Sorbonne University in Paris titled Islamism and Science. In this lecture, he tried to prove that Islam and science could not prosper simultaneously, and that Muslims progressed academically only when they became religiously weak. In response to this lecture, Jamaluddin published 2 articles in major journals which proved that it was not Islam, but Christianity which historically hindered scientific progress. Renan was stunned and impressed by the scholarly caliber of these articles. In his response to Jamaluddin's articles, he called him the Afghan Sheikh of extraordinary intelligence. Later, when he met him, he described the meeting as surreal and inspiring wonder. He felt that Avicenna, Ibn Sina, or Averroes, Ibn Rushd, had come to life and were sitting with him. In reply to Jamaluddin's arguments, Renan stated that he had not meant the teachings of Islam but the Islam followed by prejudiced and highly conservative Muslims in Islamic countries. He also could not resist adding that all divine religions are obliged to oppose factual sciences, and in this, Christianity is not superior to Islam. Christian societies, however, have managed to free themselves from their religion's limitations. Muslim societies have been unable to do the same, but it is hoped that liberal-minded Muslims will one day achieve such freedom. Had this Western philosopher examined Islam in greater depths, he could never have made such a claim. He had admitted earlier that in the first half of Islamic history, the sciences grew exponentially compared to the second half. Does this fact itself not prove Islam's compatibility with science and knowledge? Earlier Muslims were, after all, better acquainted with the proper spirit of Islam. Like other Western philosophers, Renan was also a proponent of the superiority of science and reason over spirituality and divinity. In spite of this, however, Renan describes a spiritual experience he once had when he visited Morocco. He says that he saw a prayer being offered in congregation in a mosque in Morocco, and the sight moved him so deeply that he felt that if he ever embraced a religion, it would be Islam. He provides no factual reasons for this spiritual experience. The debate between the 2 great philosophers from the East and the West reached no definitive conclusion, but Jamaluddin fulfilled the obligation of communicating Islam's message to the Western world, and this effort made him prominent in the eyes of the Western intellectuals. Meanwhile, in Sudan, Muhammad Ahmad, also known as the Sudani Mahdi, laid siege to Khartoum, capital of Sudan, with his forces. The British General Gordon was completely cut off as Mahdi's forces surrounded the city. The British government attempted to convince Jamaluddin to go to Khartoum and act as mediator between Mahdi's forces and Gordon's. However, Gordon was killed soon after, and Jamaluddin also remained firm on his opinion that mediation was worthless unless the British agreed to withdraw their armed forces from Sudan and return freedom to Egypt. On another occasion, the British attempted to recruit Jamaluddin to help unify the Islamic countries to form a bloc in order to put pressure on Russia. Jamaluddin thought it appropriate to take advantage of the conflict between Russia and Britain to further Islamic interests, and he agreed. Sir Drummond Wolff was chosen by the British to accompany Jamaluddin to Turkey and address various relevant matters with the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire. However, a couple of days before they were to leave for Turkey, Drummond Wolff chose to head off alone without letting Jamaluddin know. This ill treatment caused much disgruntlement in the heart of Jamaluddin against British politics. Jamaluddin in Tsar's Russia. Disappointed by the British, Jamaluddin wondered if gaining the support of Russia instead would be beneficial for the Muslims. The Tsardom of Russia was an oppressive place for the 14 million Muslims living there. They were second-class citizens and subject to many restrictions, including publication of the Quran. This naturally led to resentment and anger within the Muslim community, and secret opposition groups in Russia constituted a fair number of Muslims. After reaching Russia, Jamaluddin met with government officials and persuaded them to convince the Tsar to restore the basic rights of Muslims. Allah blessed his efforts to the extent that the Tsar gave permission to publish the Quran and other Islamic literature. However, Jamaluddin was unable to negotiate an alliance between Russia and Islamic countries that would protect them from European colonialism. Still, within the 1-year duration of his stay, he had succeeded in fulfilling a long-desired wish of Russian Muslims, who were greatly indebted to him. Jamaluddin Afghani was not one to rest or stand passively. If he did not succeed in one mission, he would divert his attention to another one. After leaving Russia, he went to Paris once more. There he met the Iranian ambassador Prince Malcolm, whom he discovered to be a like-minded individual. Prince Malcolm made a special request for a proposal of reforms for the Shah of Iran, Nasiruddin Qajar. Jamaluddin drafted a proposal with diligence and sincerity and visited Iran personally, but his democratic disposition made no allowances for dictatorships, and the proposed reforms placed more limitations on the Shah's power than was acceptable to him, so the matter came to nothing. Jamaluddin traveled to Russia once more. He very much wanted to gain Russian support for Muslim countries against Europe. This time, he met with his friend and famous journalist Katkov, who had a great deal of influence among the political elite of Russia. Jamaluddin wanted to gain his assistance with this cause, but Katkov died suddenly, bringing this scheme to nothing. During his stay in Russia, he also met with the Tsar, who was so impressed with Jamaluddin's knowledge of and insight into global affairs that he invited him to stay in Russia as the leader of all Russian Muslims. Jamaluddin declined and proceeded to Germany instead. Then he went to Paris for an exhibit, where he met the Shah of Iran, who insisted on Jamaluddin accompanying him to Iran. Jamaluddin declined this offer too at first, but then accepted out of diplomacy. From Paris, Jamaluddin had to travel to Russia first, reasons for which will be discussed later. He then arrived in Iran. A breath of fresh air for Persia, Jamaluddin's visit to Iran Qazi. Abdul Ghaffar discusses the situation in Iran when Jamaluddin first arrived. He writes, "This was a dark period of time in the history of Iran. The nation of Iran was on the brink of destruction. Nasiruddin's government was imposed on Iran almost as a punishment. Nasiruddin was captivated by the base, materialistic attractions of life so prevalent in Europe. Huge amounts of money were being wasted in Europe's cafes and markets." In 1889 CE, Nasiruddin arrived in Europe for the third time for the sake of tourism. He had already been on a leisurely trip of Europe twice, once in 1873 and then in 1878. These trips were highly expensive and almost bankrupted the nation, after which it was easy for European powers to begin interfering in the internal affairs of Iran like they had done in Egypt. Like Khedive Ismail, Nasiruddin was also willing to sell his national treasures to the highest bidder. European creditors have always taken pleasure in crushing such foolish, pleasure-seeking kings of the East under their debt, and Nasiruddin was no exception. Under the guise of friendship, they nudged Nasiruddin towards effective strategies to suck the maximum amount of money from the people. After the Shah's return from Europe in October 1889, he opened the door even wider for further concessions to Britain and Russia. The letters that Syed Jamaluddin Afghani later wrote to jurists about Iran contain a lot of the sheer robbery going on in Iran at that moment in time. An exclusive contract with many considerations to build a road from Ahvaz to Tehran was awarded to a British company. The mining of minerals was practically handed to European contractors. The British were given permission to establish a national bank. A Russian prince was given a monopoly of the railway network. A European company was allowed to establish a lottery, which wasted huge amounts of Iran's money. It was in these conditions that Jamaluddin was to travel to Iran. When Iran's Prime Minister Mirza Asghar Khan heard about Jamaluddin's impending arrival, he became rather wary of his potential closeness to the Shah. A supporter of Britain, he was also afraid that Jamaluddin's enthusiastic backing of improvement in Russia-Muslim relations coupled with the Shah's recent leaning in favor of Russia could harm British interests in the country. To delay Jamaluddin's arrival in Iran, therefore, the Prime Minister sent him a message requesting that he go to Russia to improve their outlook on a potential alliance with Iran. Jamaluddin accepted this request in good faith. He traveled once more to Russia, where he met with dozens of important people and tried to improve the public's opinion of Iran. When he felt that he had succeeded in his mission, he proceeded to Tehran, where he sent an alert of his arrival to both the Shah and the Prime Minister. Apart from a welcome message, Jamaluddin received no other communications. He stayed for some months with Haji Muhammad Hassan, attempting frequently to meet with the Prime Minister without success. On the other end, the Russians were awaiting a result of the dialogue they had engaged in with Jamaluddin. When some time had passed and the Russians became more insistent, Jamaluddin told them frankly, "I have not been able to meet with the Prime Minister, and the reason is unknown." The Russians therefore gave up on this unfruitful endeavor and decided to engage through ambassadorial channels. Since sitting idle was not his style, Jamaluddin once more engaged in lectures. Haji Muhammad Hassan's residence attracted scholars, students, and the general public as the classes took off. Watching his popularity rise, the Prime Minister convinced the Shah that Jamaluddin was a threat to his reign, and that Iran's climate was not favorable for reforms at the moment. The Shah's suspicion against Jamaluddin rose. At the same time, Jamaluddin's standing in Russia had also fallen when his promised negotiations for better relations did not take place. When he began openly criticizing the Prime Minister's conduct, he received an order to leave Tehran. Jamaluddin asked the permission to return to Europe, which was not granted, so he took refuge in a shrine called Abdul Azim Shrine near Tehran. This shrine was famous for providing sanctuary to whoever entered it, and was therefore known as a safe refuge. From here, Jamaluddin wrote a letter to the Shah. In it, he detailed the dismissive behavior of the Prime Minister ever since Jamaluddin's arrival in Iran, and asked for the reason. He inquired why he had been invited to Iran if this was the treatment he was to expect. After clearing his position, he once again reassured the Shah of his sincerity and goodwill, and mentioned that he was waiting in the Abdul Azim Shrine for any order by the Shah. He never received a reply to his letter, but in the meantime he once again began to attract large numbers of people wanting to take advantage of his presence in Iran. His lectures were so moving and resonating that thousands of his supporters carried a revolutionary determination in their hearts after listening to him in the sanctuary. Exiled once more. 7 months after his entrance into the sanctuary, in 1890 CE, Jamaluddin fell ill. During this illness, 500 soldiers appeared one day on horseback to arrest him on the Shah's orders. Nothing stopped the Shah, neither the sanctity of the shrine nor the unpopularity of this order amongst the people, and nor Jamaluddin's ill health. He was summarily exiled from Iran. He describes his arrest himself. In severe ill health, I was tied to a donkey with chains and ropes by merciless soldiers. My health worsened because of this treatment. The weather was extremely cold, and a chilly wind was blowing, which hit the body such that it felt like arrows were piercing me all over. In this situation, the chains were wounding my body even further. The soldiers did not show any mercy either. My protests and my illness had no effect on them. Thus, the long journey from Iran to Basra, a city in Iraq, was completed. After reaching Basra, Jamaluddin wrote a long letter to the Iranian Grand Ayatollah Mirza Hassan Shirazi. In the letter, he stated that even if the personal shortcomings of the Shah were overlooked, the damage he was causing the economy would soon manifest openly, and it would be the general public that would be forced to suffer. In particular, he drew attention to the handover to the British of the right to cultivate tobacco in the country, and addressed the Ayatollah in these words: "O guardian of Islam, will you not rise to help this nation and unite them, and purge this country of its filth using the purity of Sharia? This Islamic country will without doubt be soon under the rule of foreigners who will reign as they wish. If you let go of this opportunity, and such a takeover happens during your lifetime, then, O Imam, your name will not be remembered in good words in the pages of history." The scholars and religious leaders were already unhappy and worried about the political situation of the country. Iran's tobacco industry had been fully sold to the British contractors, and the profit had only benefited the Shah and his ministers. Jamaluddin's letter acted as a spark of fire to a pile of gunpowder. The next day, a religious verdict, fatwa, was issued by Mirza Shirazi, declaring the use of tobacco in any form to be tantamount to war against the Imam. This verdict took effect so rapidly and comprehensively that when the Shah asked for his usual hookah the next day, he was told that there was no tobacco in the palace. When he inquired about the reason in surprise, he was told that all the tobacco in the palace had been destroyed in line with the verdict by the Grand Ayatollah. Furious, the Shah demanded why his permission had not been sought beforehand. His servants replied that this was a religious matter, so his permission was not thought to be necessary. After intense pressure, Shah Nasruddin was forced to cancel the tobacco contract with the British company, after which the verdict against tobacco was repealed by Mirza Shirazi. This was a slap in the face of Nasruddin, who had tried to humiliate Syed Jamaluddin, but in the end was humiliated himself. Jamaluddin was still involved in Iranian politics after he had left Basra and arrived in London. He wrote about the corruptions of the Qajar regime in the magazine Zia-ul-Kafiqin, where he encouraged the Iranians to overthrow Nasruddin in favor of a better leader. He felt that the climate in Iran was favorable for a revolution. He also held several meetings with the former Iranian ambassador and his friend Prince Malcolm. He was in agreement with Jamaluddin's views, and therefore a target of the Shah's wrath. Jamaluddin was thus absorbed in Iranian politics when the Turkish ambassador conveyed an invitation from the Sultan to come to Constantinople. The last flight of the Eagle to Constantinople. Jamaluddin had by now become so fed up with kings and their hypocritical practices that he refused the invitation to Constantinople. The ambassador, however, was persistent, forcing Jamaluddin to seriously consider the matter and confer with Prince Malcolm. In the end, he concluded that an attempt should be made in Turkey as well, in case it could have a positive outcome for Muslims. Therefore, in 1892 CE, Jamaluddin left London and arrived in Turkey. Sultan Abdul Hamid met him in Constantinople with a warm welcome and treated him as a royal guest. He was given a beautiful house to stay in, and a monthly honorarium was also fixed. The Sultan appeared to be very much in awe of Jamaluddin and treated him with great respect. He would meet with Jamaluddin for hours where they discussed the topic of unity in the Islamic world. Whenever Jamaluddin arrived for a meeting, the Sultan would greet him by kissing his cheek. Jamaluddin also offered the Friday prayers regularly with the Sultan. But after a short while, events took a turn. To understand why this happened, it is essential to understand Turkey's political climate at that time. At its peak, the Ottoman Empire had spanned an area of around 4 million square miles and 3 continents, constituting a population of tens of millions. For centuries, the Islamic world had accepted its strength and position as leader. When its decline started in the 17th century, large regions began slipping out of the control of the Ottomans, and all attempts to stop or reverse this process ended in failure. The succeeding emperors were unable to handle the empire they inherited, and its division continued unabated. When the situation is viewed in a historical perspective, it is astonishing to see how the foolishness of rulers and the apathy of the general public can lead to the destruction of empires built on centuries of hard work and dedication. The Ottoman Empire's decline originates from 1664 CE, when they were defeated in a battle by Austria. In 1682 CE, They were badly defeated once more in Vienna, forcing them to adopt a defensive stance. Near the end of the 17th century, an Austrian prince won a victory over the Ottomans again during the Battle of Zenta, leading to the Treaty of Karlowitz. By the terms of this treaty, the Ottomans were forced to cede many of their territories to Europeans. Ukraine was ceded to Poland and Morea to Venice. Other areas were ceded to Russia and yet others to Austria. In 1736 CE, Russia seized Ochakov and Azov. European powers and Russia constantly aided and funded rebellions within the Ottoman Empire in an effort to weaken it. The British, for example, aided and conspired against the Ottomans in Egypt, which resulted in local leaders declaring their own kingdom and autonomy from the Ottomans. Sinister propaganda against the Ottomans was insidiously spread throughout the Muslim regions under Ottoman rule. The concept of nationalism began to take hold, and the local populace gradually turned against the Ottomans and the institution of caliphate. Within half a century, the Ottoman Empire had become so weak that many Muslim-majority areas rebelled, and most non-Muslim areas were forcibly annexed by Russia and other European forces. In 1830 CE, France took control of Algeria. In 1832 CE, constant interference and pressure from the British and the Russians forced the Ottomans to grant independence to Greece. In 1853 CE, Russia occupied Crimea and encouraged rebellions in Albania and Bosnia. Serbia declared its independence in 1876 CE. In 1878 CE, Russia formally declared war on the Ottomans, who faced severe defeat in Anatolia and in the European part of Turkey. Romania and Slovenia gained freedom, while parts of Turkey were granted to Bulgaria. The provinces of Kars, Ardahan, and Bayazid, now Dogubayazid, were relinquished to Russia, and Cyprus was handed over to Britain. A rebellion took place in eastern Rumelia, which was then incorporated into Bulgaria. The wounded Ottoman Empire was struggling to survive, having been termed the sick man of Europe by the same powers that had reduced it to such a state. These various powers were callously distributing various areas of the empire amongst each other, while the empire itself was in dire straits. The Sultan decided to strengthen the empire internally to be better able to face external pressures, and began a series of reforms which helped stabilize the situation to an extent. Russia, afraid that internal stability would reduce the chances of interference, escalated rebellions going on within the empire to such a degree that the Sultan could no longer focus on the reforms. A faction had grown within the Turks which preferred a democratic system over the Islamic Caliphate that had lasted for centuries. Midhat Pasha was a leading statesman belonging to this faction. He gathered support from scholars and ministers and succeeded in deposing the Sultan. Murad V ascended to the throne, but was deposed after 3 months on grounds of being mentally ill. He was succeeded by Abdul Hamid II. Abdul Hamid was a monarchist. He found it unacceptable to concede power to others, even if such priorities led to the downfall of his empire. To consolidate his control, he dissolved the parliament, and then placed Midhat Pasha under house arrest, and later killed. Increasing restrictions on reformists led the Sultan to believe that he had the situation under control. On the foreign front, he had proved to be as incompetent as his predecessors. As land continued to slip out of his control, he was well aware that sooner or later he would have to face a massive rebellion. He therefore decided to gain the moral support of the rest of the Islamic world in order to strengthen his own domestic position. It appeared to him that Jamaluddin Afghani would be a good pawn for the completion of such a task. He was popular in all the Islamic countries. Shiites and Sunnis alike admired his character, his passion, and his supreme knowledge and insight. Thus he invited Jamaluddin to come to Constantinople. The last attempt. Jamaluddin did not hold a particularly favorable view of Sultan Abdul Hamid II, nor did he fully believe his promises and assurances. Why then did he agree to stay with him in Turkey? Qazi Abdul Ghaffar explains, just like the Sultan wanted to use Syed Jamaluddin Afghani to further his own self-interests, Syed wanted to use the Sultan to promote unity among Muslims. Syed saw Islamic unity as essential in improving the conditions of Muslims. The Sultan's encouragement caused a potential scheme for Islamic unity to take root in the Syed's mind, and from that a plan to call representatives of Islamic countries to attend a conference began to blossom. Jamaluddin dictated 500 letters to various people in Arabic, Hindi, Persian, and Turkish. Most replies were encouraging. Jamaluddin informed the Sultan of the positive response, who was delighted. This period was one of relative tranquility for Jamaluddin, and he was the Sultan's favorite. The situation changed when Sultan Abdul Hamid arrested some of Jamaluddin's companions at the request of Shah Nasiruddin and extradited them to Iran. Outraged at this treatment of his friends, Jamaluddin protested. The Sultan appeared to regret his decision and wrote to Iran's Shah instructing him to return the prisoners, but they had already been executed. This event considerably lowered whatever trust Jamaluddin had in the Sultan. At the same time, a couple of other occurrences also sowed suspicion against Jamaluddin in the Sultan's heart. Sultan Abdul Hamid knew that Jamaluddin leaned towards democracy and strongly disliked dictatorships and monarchies. On the other hand, the Sultan preferred to centralize power. As an example, the recruitment for his secret police continued to increase steadily in order to spy on people. He was afraid that Jamaluddin would demonstrate his dislike in public, which could be disastrous for the Sultan's public image. To avoid this and to please Jamaluddin, he sent a messenger to him carrying the highest possible award in Turkey. When the messenger arrived, Jamaluddin was lecturing his students. He looked at the medal carelessly and hung it around the neck of a cat sitting nearby. Dumbstruck, the messenger cried, "Do you not know that the Sultan himself has sent you this award?" Jamaluddin replied, "I am well aware, but the necks who wear such medals usually belong to the dishonest." The messenger returned and narrated the conversation to the Sultan who, although furious, could do nothing but seethe in silence. Like everywhere, Jamaluddin's popularity in Turkey and his apparent closeness to the Sultan made him no few enemies among courtiers. A leading opposer was Abul Huda, who flattered the Sultan and told him stories of Jamaluddin's indifference to him. Struck by his stories, the Sultan asked Jamaluddin to befriend Abul Huda. Jamaluddin, who had formed an opinion of the man as being greedy and selfish, declined the request. When Abul Huda heard this, he was furious. He conspired against Jamaluddin, assuring the Sultan that Jamaluddin had met secretly with the Khedive of Egypt when he had recently visited Turkey, and that he wanted the Khedive to be the Caliph of Muslims instead of the Sultan. This alarmed the Sultan, who ordered a closer monitoring of Jamaluddin. After a while, the Sultan became convinced that his suspicions were groundless, but Jamaluddin had lost hope in the Sultan's goodness. He cared about his own power and his throne above all other considerations, and he was furthering his own self-interests under the guise of strengthening the caliphate. In Jamaluddin, however, he had met a man who refused to be purchased at any price. He said what he thought was right, and no amount of the Sultan's favor or high-end feasts could stop him from speaking the truth. He had also given a man refuge from the heir to the throne. This independent tendency continuously worried the Sultan. Over in Iran, the Shah was assassinated by a follower of Jamaluddin in the same shrine from which he had banished him. The Sultan, who happened to be a rather superstitious man, considered this a bad omen. He realized that Jamaluddin's speech and writings have a way of inspiring a passion that can lead to the overthrowing of kings. The Sultan therefore escalated the monitoring of Jamaluddin through his spies. All favors and concessions were withdrawn, and even visitors were restricted. When Jamaluddin decided to leave the empire to go to London, he was not permitted to do so. Instead, he received a message saying that it would be humiliating for Islam if Jamaluddin left the Caliph of Muslims in anger to stay with non-Muslims. Jamaluddin himself had been considering this very issue, so he abandoned the idea of London. His friend Blunt writes, "When I went to Constantinople again, I met with him. He told me that he lives here half like a guest and half like a captive. He was still glad that his lips had not been sealed. He could still speak the truth as was his habit, and this he continued to do." Restrictions increased even further. Soon, the only visitor Jamaluddin was allowed was his student Burhanuddin. The loneliness affected his health, and he became quite ill. A swelling rose on his mouth, which soon became cancerous. Tranquility after a lifetime of restlessness. This time was a time of great pain and loneliness for Jamaluddin. There is a memorable picture from this time with Jamaluddin sitting on his bed. He has a book in his lap and rosary beads in his hand. In front of him is an issue of the magazine The New York Herald. Medical treatment was not effective, and Jamaluddin's condition continued to worsen. He was often unconscious for long periods of time. The Sultan appointed Dr. Jamil Pasha as his personal physician. During treatment, 6 of his teeth were knocked out. Jamaluddin expressed a wish to go to Vienna for treatment, but the Sultan did not permit this either. In this illness, and while practically under house arrest on the 9th of March 1897 CE, Jamaluddin's soul departed to meet its creator at last. At the time of death, he was only 58 years old. According to some reports, his funeral was a quiet one, while others hold that it was a grand, majestic occasion. He was buried anonymously, however, and his grave was unmarked for a long while, until an American citizen had a headstone constructed for it at personal expense. Almost half a century later, his body was taken from Istanbul and reburied in Kabul, Afghanistan. It has never been confirmed with certainty if Jamaluddin's death was natural, or if it was the result of a conspiracy. Jamaluddin's closest companions have always believed that the death was not natural. Sultan Abdul Hamid has been suggested to be the culprit. He was accused of sending Jamaluddin poisoned toothpicks, which caused the tumors in his mouth. Some also argued that the physician who was sent to treat Jamaluddin was instructed to administer an injection which caused Jamaluddin's death. Whether or not his death was natural, the self-interested dictators and monarchs of the Muslim world must have breathed a sigh of relief at his passing from this world. The general Muslim populace, on the other hand, felt that they had been orphaned. A sincere man who had fought for their rights and never compromised on his principles for political gain had died. History stands witness that the rulers who had treated Jamaluddin particularly harshly did not escape nature's vengeance. Khedive Ismail of Egypt was deposed, Shah Nasruddin was assassinated, and Sultan Abdul Hamid II was dethroned in 1908. Jamaluddin's unique qualities and attributes. Syed Jamaluddin Afghani possessed broad shoulders, a wheatish complexion, and a dignified expression which lent support to his authoritative personality. The mesmerizing sparkle in his eyes entranced and fascinated his audience, giving weight to what he was saying. He usually donned Arab garb, though he had begun to wear Turkish robes in the last era of his life. His personality did not allow indolence or inactivity. He spent very little time sleeping, and was of the habit of waking up early in the morning. He did not consume much food. Indeed, 1 meal a day was generally sufficient for him. He did, however, enjoy tea and tobacco very much. He also loved reading. He did not wear spectacles, although he had to keep the book near his eyes to read properly. Once he began a task, he would become totally absorbed in, not resting until the task was finished. Jamaluddin was an excellent conversationalist. He spoke unhurriedly, and only after understanding the other's point of view. His arguments were so persuasive that most people could not help but be converted to his perspective after speaking with him. He was a solemn, contemplative person, not prone to humor or jokes. He was unfailingly polite to all, young or old. People could listen to him for hours without becoming bored or fatigued. Jamaluddin could speak for hours, too. Anyone who met Jamaluddin once would leave with an enchanting impression of sincerity, honor, resolve, and courage. He had a superb memory. Merely flipping through a book was enough for him to memorize the contents. He was completely fluent in Pashto, Arabic, and Persian, and had learnt French in 3 months without a tutor. While in Constantinople, he once disagreed with someone on a topic and declared that 3 months later, he would give a lecture on that topic in Turkish. Those around him were incredulous, as he was unfamiliar with Turkish. But 3 months later, he proved his claim true. He could also communicate in Russian and English. He was highly courageous. He had no qualms in stating the right thing, no matter the perils and other considerations. He used to say, "It is a result of man's negligence that he begins to think that bravery or courage are equivalent to death. If he considers the situation more carefully, he would realize that most of these dangers are only in his imagination." He himself talked to kings with a boldness they were not used to, and it startled them. Nasiruddin once asked him, "What do you wish for?" Jamaluddin replied, "Only your 2 ears, that is your full attention." Sometimes his frankness could lead to harshness. When someone would mention of those who had usurped the rights of the common Muslims, his temper would rise and his words could become biting. He abhorred differences over petty issues. He had no patience with ignorant people, nor with braggarts. He felt no awe when in the presence of important, rich, or influential people because he judged people by their character. He also detested pointless or wasteful discussions. While in Calcutta, he was introduced to a famous poet of the time, Da Delvi, and told that he was the most influential and talented poet of India at the time. Jamaluddin requested a recital of some of his poetry. When Da obliged, Jamaluddin fell silent, looking disappointed and sad. After Da had left, people asked the reason for such a reaction. Jamaluddin sighed and read a few verses of poetry which reflected regret and grief. He felt unhappy because at a time of such trials and tribulations for the nation, India's greatest poet was speaking of flowers and meadows, of the meetings and separations of lovers, when he should have been inspiring his nation to nobler goals. Jamaluddin's propensity of speaking only the truth and nothing but the truth, no matter considerations of tact or politics, was an integral part of his personality. His unparalleled insights and his frank, sincere personality transfixed all those who met him. Even the kings would be impressed by his personality and insist on spending more time with Jamaluddin, bringing him closer to them. Subsequently, when Jamaluddin would try to present the interests of the Ummah instead of letting them peddle their self-interests, these kings would become disgruntled with him. Additionally, many in the king's courts would become jealous of him due to his closeness with the corridors of power and conspire against him in various ways. Jamaluddin, however, never cared much about him enemies. What did he have to lose after all? He had no household of his own, nor wealth, nor family. He never married. He spent his whole life in pursuit of his mission and refused the rewards of kings when offered. This refusal of wealth allowed Jamaluddin to enjoy the freedom of thought the way he did. He was unwilling to exchange his beliefs and opinions for a few notes and coins. Once Nasiruddin sent him a gift of a diamond ring and 1,000 Toman coins. Jamaluddin returned the gift of money and gave the diamond ring to Nasiruddin's son. While staying in London, Jamaluddin was faced with severe financial difficulties. One of his sympathizers informed his dear friend Blunt of these difficulties in a letter. "I am writing these lines in secret, so please keep the contents to yourself. Jamaluddin's financial situation is very tight. He has had to leave his residence in London and move to the suburbs. Someone tried to help him, but he refused. Now he has to travel in 3rd class on the railway." Further on, he wrote, "Please send some money anonymously. If he finds out, he will be furious." Jamaluddin's student Muhammad Abdu has written a superb commentary on his teacher's personality. Unfortunately, it is too long to quote here and must be summarized. He writes that Afghani's knowledge and understanding were beyond description. He captured the intricacies of language and the meanings of words in great depths. He could also present his argument in different frames. It was easy for him to suggest solutions to even the most complex and difficult problems with just a little contemplation. Whatever topic came up, he was able to converse on it intelligently and to reach hidden aspects of the subject. Poetry, arts, conversation, and debate. His mind worked in all areas and he awed the East and the West with his intellect. Further on, he writes that in his opinion, apart from the prophets, if Allah has given someone special intellectual powers, insight, and wisdom, it would be Jamaluddin. Such is the bounty of Allah, which He bestows on whom He wills, and Allah is the Lord of the highest bounty. The purity of his heart was the highlight of his character. His capacity for tolerance and forbearance was unparalleled amongst his contemporaries. But when the honor of the Muslim nation was in question, his clemency could turn into righteous anger, and sparks would fly. Thus he displayed both extreme tolerance and extreme wrath. His generosity was such that he often gave away all that he had at the time. He trusted Allah completely, never letting worry for sustenance or financial conditions overcome him. He was very careful with what had been given into his safekeeping. With those who did not hinder his actions, he was patient and treated them with kindness. If someone treated him harshly or tried to put obstacles in his way, he felt justified in being harsh in return. As his intellect and wisdom grew and developed, his natural abruptness softened and became refined. He was engaged day and night in trying to protect the interests of all Muslims. Wherever he saw a glimmer of hope, he pursued that possibility to obtain whatever benefits he could. He was often faced with despair, and his hopes often crumbled to dust, but he continued his struggle throughout his life. The ups and downs of life could not affect him for long. He bore them with patience and kept his eyes on the bigger goal. Despite his amazing intellect and other abilities, he never displayed the slightest arrogance. He took pleasure instead in being related to Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, because he felt that personal accomplishments and merits were from Allah alone. An astonishing human, a praiseworthy Muslim. Jamaluddin Afghani was possessed of extraordinary skills and spent his life in remarkable circumstances. His presence in the midst of selfish, opportunistic and cowardly Muslim rulers was a blessing for the rest of the Muslim population. Disregarding geographical boundaries, he was as a fire, sparking the flames of revolution wherever he went. The opposition of his enemies and the vengeance of kings could do no harm to his lofty ideals and revolutionary convictions. Iqbal's verse is a fitting description of his personality. In this world, the people of faith live like the sun. Here they sink, there they arise, there they sink, here they arise. The world was his oyster. Everywhere he went, he conveyed the message that this universe belongs to Allah, not to kings and emperors. Although he had left his own homeland, he became a leader in multiple foreign nations, no mean feat by any standard. He was exiled from various countries, but not before the earth beneath reverberated with slogans of change and revolution. The conditions that Muslims across the world were living in, humiliation, slavery, poverty, had snatched away peace and tranquility from his life. Like Mercury, he was restless and agitated, willing to sacrifice any and everything to be able to pull out the Ummah from the pit of despair and disgrace that it had fallen into. Leaders everywhere tried to convince Jamaluddin to join them, impressed with his intellectual abilities and his popularity with the general public. If he wanted, he could have been a minister, a diplomat, even a Sheikhul Islam, and enjoyed the wealth, influence, and status that accompany such positions. But such worldly gains had never been the prize that Jamaluddin sought. His objective was to turn around the moral, intellectual, and political degradation of the Muslims and help them reach the zenith that they had once enjoyed. He was particularly resentful of the negligence and shortcomings of the kings and the scholars, the two key elements of Muslim societies. It was unacceptable to him that Western powers should triumph over Muslims, exploiting their resources and wealth for their own gains, and turn Muslims into slaves. This slavery was not just physical or geographical, but also mental, cultural, economic, and ideological. Jamaluddin's wise eyes could see the clutches of colonial web tightening around the Muslim nations in the future, and he agonized over it as Muslims slipped deeper and deeper. He was aware that change could not come from cool emotions, soft speeches, and a humble tread. Thus, he chose a difficult and dangerous path, and began to hold accountable every section of Muslim society for its poor performance without holding back. Naturally, no one found it easy to accept, and he was exiled and banished from place after place, his meager belongings confiscated and his dignity torn. He did not allow the hurt to his reputation to bother him, because he was aware that the path he walked was one that prophets have walked, and prophets have had their dignity impugned while walking the path of the truth far more than any other human. He was familiar with the glad tidings of the Quran, addressed to those who give up everything to fight for what is right. So their Lord answered them, "Never will I allow the work of any of you, male or female, to go to waste. You are similar to one another." So those who left their homelands, and were expelled from their homes, and were tortured in my way and fought and were killed, I shall certainly write off all their wrongdoings, and shall certainly admit them into gardens beneath which rivers flow. This is their reward from Allah, and it is Allah with whom lies the best of rewards. Al-Imran, 195. His enemies tried very hard to besmirch his reputation, but all their attempts failed, and Jamaluddin's popularity with the people continued to rise. Among his admirers is Allama Muhammad Iqbal, poet of the East. Iqbal was a fervent admirer and supporter of Jamaluddin Afghani, and remembers him as the pioneer of the Muslim Renaissance movement in modern times. He also calls Jamaluddin the greatest Easterner and Muslim of the time. In Iqbal's opinion, the best and the most mature thinker and doer of our times was born in Afghanistan, who wrote little but spoke much, and groomed all those who had the honor of his company into miniature Jamaluddins. Iqbal claimed that no one person sparked such fervor into the spirit of Islam in this era as much as Jamaluddin did, and that his soul is still active today in the Islamic world. With the sky as its limit, Jamaluddin Afghani passed away from this world before Iqbal stepped foot into the practical world. Thus, Iqbal meets with Jamaluddin only in his imagination. In his poem, Javaid Nama, after spending time with Rumi on the moon, he steps onto the planet Mercury, where he hears the Adhan being called. He then witnesses Jamaluddin Afghani conducting a congregational prayer, reciting the Quran so beautifully and heartrendingly that it is beyond description. After the prayer, Iqbal kisses Jamaluddin's hand, and Jamaluddin asks Iqbal about the condition of the Islamic world. Two thoughtful souls burning for the Muslim Ummah share their pain, and the unity of their goals bridges the gaps of space and time. Now Iqbal asks him about the key to solving the numerous problems facing Muslims today. In response, Jamaluddin instructs him to follow the way of the Prophet, peace be upon him, a personality in which noble humanity and the mission of the Caliphate were united, and at their peak. The connection that Iqbal shared with Jamaluddin, spiritual, ideological, and emotional, and the harmony he enjoyed with him in thought and in action were demonstrated symbolically in the real world too. In December 1944 CE, 47 years after his death, Jamaluddin's body was taken from his grave in Turkey to be reburied in Afghanistan. On the way, the coffin was brought to Lahore for a day. It was first placed for a little while on the steps of Badshahi Mosque, and was then settled next to the grave of Muhammad Iqbal. Thousands of Muslims watched with teary eyes as two great Muslims lay side by side and prayed for the forgiveness of two individuals who had lived in different times, but their hearts had beat to a single rhythm. Who knows, perhaps the two souls are united in heaven, where they cry over the dishonor in which Muslims have now remained for centuries, praying to the Almighty for the recovery and blossoming of their people. After all, hope was the doctrine of them both. The belief that spring always comes after fall, no matter the length and the harshness of the fall season.